Hey guys, today we're following up on our previous video, which was a pull guide for Howler. If you're more interested in whether or not you should pull her, please go check that video out. This one is going to be our usual, a breakdown of Howler's kit, how she functions, her rotations, as well as smaller details like substats and Mindscape. Howler is a versatile fire saboteur, being capable of either single target or multi-target teams, as well as having a heavy focus on defense down. Despite being a standard character, she has a very solid A0 kit, so let's get into it. Now, usually we start with the character by explaining their A0 or their passives, which kind of give context to the rest of their kit. Howler is interesting because her kit kind of all comes together to explain itself, so just stick with me here after I explain her kit and skills, and I'll kind of do a general overview on what she's trying to do and how all of her moves kind of come together. Runa's A0 is actually one of the most straightforward. Essentially, if she has one of these two buffs, she can use her skill 3. Respectively, these buffs refer to her skill 1 and her skill 2. Her A0 says she must use a skill before being allowed to use her skill 3. Then, after using her skill 3, that target's healing received and defense has a chance of being lowered for 2 turns. We're going to talk more about that chance I mentioned previously, but let's move on to her passives for now. Passive 1 is called Peppy Guard Dog and increases attack based on 60% of her Ailment Accuracy, while Passive 2, Faithful Dog, increases Runa's attack by 33% after she uses skills to inflict debuffs, and allies also receive that damage buff for dealing fire, ice, wind, or electric damage, or if they deal follow-up damage. In this passive, previously, it was just for fire damage in that elemental table. It did not have the other 3. Next, we're taking a look at Howler's skills, with skill 1 being a multi-target fire skill called Welcome Hug, decreasing enemy defense based on a percentage of Howler's Ailment Accuracy, and decreases even more when taking fire, ice, wind, or electric damage, with an extra chance to inflict the burn status effect. From here, she can use her skill 3 after her skill 1. Skill 2 is Furious Bark, a single target fire skill, which deals fire damage and decreases defense at a higher scale than skill 1 since it's single target. It also gives Howler a buff that unlocks her skill 3 as well, just like skill 1. To be clear, these defense down debuffs that I'm talking about from skill 1 and skill 2, they don't stack, so you're not going to see them back to back in a rotation. If you're wondering why we went over her skills 1 and 2 so quickly, it's because here at skill 3, this is where things kind of coalesce and all these effects of her A0, her passives, and her skill 1 and 2 kind of come into play. So, skill 3, Wolf Wolf Blaze, changes based on whether or not you have that buff from skill 1 or the buff from skill 2. To keep things more simple, we're going to refer to skill 1 as the spread attack and skill 2 as the single target attack. If you have the spread attack buff, skill 3 will deal fire damage to all enemies and increase all target damage based on Runa's Ailment Accuracy, as well as their fire, ice, wind, or electric damage taken. For skill 3, if you use the single target attack beforehand, you get the, single target attack buff. This attack deals double its potency for damage, and then increases the enemy's damage taken based on Runa's Ailment Accuracy. Most importantly, it increases follow-up damage taken for 2 turns. Okay, hopefully you made it through all that. Like I said, there will be a recap where we kind of go through things again in a more of an overview sense. Lastly is her highlight. So for her highlight, she deals fire damage to all enemies and inflicts those enemies with 2 stacks of a debuff. While they have this debuff, they take increased fire, ice, wind, or electric damage, and it also increases their follow-up damage based on Runa's Ailment Accuracy. Doing one of those types of damage will consume a debuff stack. There were changes made to how this highlight works, and it's a little more complex than just a damage buff. The debuff that was previously buffed, fire damage, now buffs fire, ice, electric, and wind damage. So essentially what I've tried to do with all of these skills is explain their new description in global, and then kind of explain to you guys what has been added into the game that was not already in the game. So a lot of these skills, for a very brief overview, a lot of these skills, the damage taken up was only included on fire. And we got these 3 new elements that also get damage taken up added to them. That's her biggest buff. To kind of recap on her highlight, Essentially, the buff has made her highlight a little more user-friendly and has made room for more strategy regarding the debuffs falling off. Before we move on, I want to address the buffs and changes made to Runa based on the 3.1 livestream. Similar to her highlight, her skills 1 and 3 had changes made to them that affect which elements receive boosted damage. So I kind of explained those moves with those buffs in mind so that you have the right idea up front of what these skills do, but I also wanted to outline them here to explain that these things are new. Okay, and that is what I would call a good idea of Runa's entire kit. So first thing to get out of the way, how her targeting works between single target and multi-target. She functions, like I said, with a couple different DPS characters, which isn't exactly normal for this game for saboteurs. For her rotation, it's going to depend on what class your DPS is. If it's a spread character, you're going to always start with skill 1, and if it's a single target character, you're going to always start with skill 2. From there, you simply alternate between that move and skill 3 for the entire fight. If you happen to get her A6 either now or definitely down the road when she hits standard, her rotation actually changes pretty substantially, and we'll address that now instead of when we go over awarenesses. In short, her A6 gives her both buffs from her skills, which normally can't happen, so that means she's allowed to open up with her best move, skill 3. From here, you then move to the normal skill that you'd use, and then to one that you wouldn't use. So, for example, for single target, that would be 3, 2, 1, and then for multi-target, it would be 3, 1, 2. I'll explain the mechanics behind this when we get to awarenesses, but for now, just understand why that A0 rotation works the way it does, and you're good to go, because I feel like most people probably aren't pulling her A6 right now. Next, we're going to talk about her skill leveling priorities and her leveling priorities for her Mindscape, because we needed a whole new page after how big that rotation list was. So, unfortunately for you all, Runa is quite the resource hog. One thing that is a little nice is if you're going to use her for spread teams and not Kotone, you can actually hold off on leveling her skill 2 for a while, since it's useless outside of A6. If you're using both those teams, though, you're going to need to level up all 3 of her skills. If you're not A6ing her and you have no single target, you can focus on skills 3 and 1. Her highlight is definitely solid as well, but I wouldn't call it a must-have as far as maxing it out. Naturally, I would max it out eventually. It's definitely not useless. It has substantial damage taken up, which is kind of her whole thing, but it seems like it might be a little awkward to work into rotations sometimes. After that, we're taking a look at Runa's Mindscape. As I will likely always preface this section with, these materials are very limited, and I wouldn't recommend making these decisions lightly, but I'm going to attempt to suggest what I think is best in here. What you buff in Runa's Mindscape depends on a few things. Her first stat is Attack Molt, which is one to avoid, in my opinion. The second stat up is Ailment Accuracy. This is a little tricky as an upgrade. The reason for that is it's very useful. The fact is, though, you don't need this Mindscape upgrade to hit her Ailment Accuracy target of 170%. That being said, if you level up those next 2 upgrades, which level up her possible defense down, it raises that ceiling, and then they increase the potential Ailment Accuracy she needs to have, that goes all the way up to 190%. So, it's a little tricky to say outright what's recommended and what isn't. Personally, I'm going to throw a couple of buffs at the skill 3 and highlight enhancement, since those are going to be the most effective buffs, and I'm going to call it a day there. You can't really go wrong upgrading either of her skill enforcement slots. Next, we move on from that number crunching nerd stuff to more number crunching nerd stuff with Howler's awarenesses. Awareness 1 is essentially a buff to her skill 3. When she uses it, if she has the multi-target buff, then enemy fire, ice, wind, or electric damage taken is increased. If she has that single target buff, then her follow-up damage is increased, with these buffs both lasting 2 turns. Her Awareness 2 makes Runa debuffs have increased crit damage taken, and enemies also receive less healing. Awareness 3 is going to be our normal awareness buff, just buffing skill 3 and highlight. Awareness 4 is a highlight buff, as usual, but this one changes the debuff attached to her highlight, making it last for 4 stacks instead of 2. Essentially, Awareness 4 doubles the value of her highlight, since it'll typically be around for another cycle of your DPS unit's attacks. Awareness 5 is a skill buff, and Awareness 6, as usual, is a complete change to Runa's kit and kind of deconstructs her as a character. So, when the battle starts, if she's A6, she gets the single target and the multi-target buffs from skill 1 and 2, but also the debuffs from these moves are extended a turn. There's also a new buff, which is gained by having both of her skill 1 and 2 buffs. Rather than reading the description to this awareness verbatim, I'm going to explain it in terms that I feel like make a little more sense, because they're so contextual to her kit, and it ends up making you have to go back and forth. Runa's A6 lets her start the fight with her strongest debuff, her skill 3, because she already starts with her skill 1 and skill 2 buffs. It also gives her a reason to use all 3 of her skills in her rotation because of the debuff extension, but also because of the new fire, ice, wind, or electric damage taken debuff added to her skill 3. So, yes, it's a very good awareness. Just to take a quick break to share my thoughts on her awarenesses, I think they're all pretty good. Obviously, her A6 is amazing, but I really like her A1. It makes her character seem very well fleshed out. I like how both sides get a buff and one side isn't favored. We saw that issue with Mont's kit. So essentially, I like how they made her awarenesses bring similar values to either side of her single target or multi-target choice with her kit. Now, for a much faster segment, we're going to review Runa's weapons, starting with her 4-star, which gives her the normal attack buff that 4-stars give, with a bonus 41% increase in Ailment Accuracy when she has either of her first 2 skills buffs. This is a solid 4-star, and it puts you a decent ways towards getting to that 170% Ailment Accuracy target. Howler's 5-star weapon is the Cerberus Claws, and I'll get this out of the way, they're really good. As a base effect, they drop the attack buff from the 4-star, and instead they give her a flat 36% Ailment Accuracy buff to start out with, no matter what. The second effect adds an additional 23% Ailment Accuracy for 2 turns when allies use fire, ice, wind, or electric skills, or if they perform follow-up action, The third effect on this weapon, because there's more, is conditional. If she's using a multi-target version of her skill 3, then all enemy defense is decreased by 16% for 3 turns. If she's using the single target buff version of her skill 3, then the enemy's defense is lowered by 33% for 3 turns. This weapon is honestly as valuable as I think most 5-star weapons should be. It buffs almost every aspect of her kit, helps push her required stats up, while also bringing more value to each of her moves, even just covering the enemy in blanket defense down after her first skill 3, which should remain active for the entire fight. I have to highly recommend this weapon. Next, we'll be reviewing Howler's Revelations card set, which ideally is the Freedom Defeat set. The Defeat card set increases Runa's Ailment Accuracy and ups her fire damage, while the Freedom Defeat set effect increases all allies' damage dealt to enemies with debuffs by 8%. So naturally a really good fit for her. If for whatever reason you can't get your hands on a Freedom space card, you can try the Departure Control set on her, which is the more standard debuffer set. So as far as what needs to be on Runa's Revelations cards, main stats and substats, we need to remember that she's a support, which usually have one stat they're fixated on. For her, that's going to be Ailment Accuracy. As we've discussed a couple times already, 170% is her base target, with a maximum of 199% to max out her A6 with a maxed out Mindscape. So that's worst case scenario for Ailment Accuracy. This means main stat wise, we obviously can make her star card an Ailment Accuracy card 100% of the time, but what about for her other cards? What main stats should we use? Well, optimally, I would probably just give her attack on her Moon and Sky, but if you have a good damage boost card, that could work too. If you're running into HP issues or anything like that on her, it's not going to be the end of the world if you don't put attack on as main stats for her other cards, but I would say if you're going for numbers, then, obviously you're going to want to throw more attack on. All right, so substats, the nitty gritty. For substats, your number 1, number 2, and number 3 priority will all be Ailment Accuracy. So many of her debuffs are centered around this stat, so to get the most out of her, you want this value maxed out. I can't stress that enough. After you hit that 170% or 190% mark, depending on where you're at with her build, you can then start focusing on other stuff. Attack percent, as always, is a great substat, but I would honestly weigh damage boost and crit rate around the same level of value and importance, since she's a support and not a DPS. These really minuscule optimizations aren't going to matter as much as they would on a character like 5-star Mont. After that, you obviously like to avoid HP and defense values, but again, we're less worried about perfecting her set with substats, and we're mainly just trying to go for those big ailment accuracy rate ups. And now we've arrived at the last section of our build guide. This is going to be talking about Howler's teams. Because of her ability to swap her rotations and adjust for single and multi-target teams, it opens her up to more combos than you'd think, since previous characters of her class like Rin, Vino, and Ki all have one DPS they stick with. Runa's first team is the Panther team. I have Panther, Howler, Cord on screen, but you could honestly swap this around a bit if you wanted to. Generally in this party, you want to see Howler as the replacement to Kiyoshi. She's doing his setup a lot faster and a lot more efficiently so that you get more bang for your buck in terms of Saboteur. So in any previous version of the team you've used, just plug Howler in for Kiyoshi. You can also bring Phoebe in and generate more stacks. The next team is the upcoming CNY Rin team, or Chinese New Year Rin, or whatever you want to call her, which drops a couple of patches from now, so fairly soon. It will honestly probably be pretty similar to the Panther team. Matoy is a great character for her, but Matoy actually doesn't drop for an entire patch after her. And I've seen builds where people use Howler and Matoy at the same time for her team. Either way, Howler will still slot very well with CNY Rin. For the third and likely strongest synergy Runa has is the Frostgale Kotone team. I know it sounds like a hot take, but it seems pretty true. Obviously, any way you cut it, the twins work great with her, but the twins work great for almost every character in this game right now. Howler's follow-up damage boost is specifically made for Kotone, and Frostgale Kotone's bosses also have a very high amount of defense, meaning that the defense down debuff really gets its value. I think the Mont Winvast Howler team is going to be very solid, but at release, we're obviously going to lean more towards Mont, Howler, and Cord. For this last part of the team section, I wanted to mention the changes they made to Howler's kit in Global, how it relates to teams. So the dev team expanding the damage taken buffs to include Ice, Electric, and Wind sort of implies that Howler will have more team variety, and in the short term, that isn't really true, because the elements they added are the ones that do follow-up attacks, which she already synergizes with, Kotone and Yui. This added team synergy might be possible much further down the line when we get characters like Akihiko, who does Spread Electric, and Summer Puppet, who has Ice Spread. However, the big problem is how Howler will be on standard at that point, but it's very likely she'll be power crept by then. So I know these characters are far off, but I wanted to mention it because it does seem like that's kind of what they were trying to do, but I'm not sure how well that's going to work out in 6 months. And finally, that brings us to the end of the Howler build guide. I had a lot of fun making this one. I've always liked her character design, but looking more into her kit, weapons, skills, all that stuff has been very fun, and a part of me feels like this is where they hit their stride, making characters like this. Unfortunately, the changes they made at the last second made things a little confusing, so I hope the explanation of these skills and how her kit works are well explained and you guys understand. And it is unfortunate, that she'll be in standard jail, but hopefully you guys are able to pull her early if you do some pulls on her. One last thing, I wanted to make a quick plug before the end of the video. I haven't really talked about it in our videos yet. I, Destro, and Watts, the other half of this channel, are currently streaming his first playthrough of Shin Megami Tensei 5 here on the channel. We're having a great time with it, and we're looking to get some feedback, so feel free to pop in if you see us streaming. As always, I hope this guide was helpful. If you guys have questions, leave them below, and we'll get around to answering them, I'm sure. Have a great day.